call Mama. She was so happy she cried. She wants you to have her wedding gown. It's white lace.
Yeah, that's good. I can't get married in your mother's dress.
You are wonderful.
Thank you. I've worked hard to become so.
I admit it, you are better than I am.
Then why are you smiling?
Because I know something you don't know.
What is that?
I am not offended.
Well, sir, you were a cowardly son of a bitch. You just shot an unarmed man.
He should have harmed himself. He's gonna decorate his saloon with my friend.
Always happy when that is the lead-in to what I'm going to take. So that's a pretty appropriate tone for the rest of the program, I think. Hi, I'm Mark. I am the Cinemaniac. We are the Cinemaniacs, you and I, here together for a musical, wonderful journey over the next 50 or so minutes while I ramble about what I watched over the last week or two. Nothing to talk about in the theater this week. There were only 2 releases, neither of them very major, and the theater, my limited time, because I lead a really busy lifestyle, and the theater locally didn't get anything new. So as I see more things, I will slot them in because things hang around for a while, but that's nothing to talk about. So first up, we're going to talk about that which you can see on home video in your house, which probably is how most people see most things these days, be it a streaming service or a physical media or something you download or something you watch in a flip book or whatever. It's all there. First up, we whiffle over to this camera, expertly done, thank you. This is a new film on Netflix. This premiered, I believe, February 1st on Netflix from the maker of Nightcrawler, the writer, director, and part of the cast of the really creepy, wonderful movie called Nightcrawler from a couple of years ago. Comes this tale of intrigue and duplicity and spoofery and horror set in the art world. Jake Gyllenhaal stars in Velvet Buzzsaw.
You've gotta have art.
Nice.
All you really need is art. When those little things in life make you frown, come on down and get a start. First you gotta have art. A great.
Funny that we used the Phantasm tag for the opening of the credits today because there's a giant essential Phantasm sphere in this movie. So direct to Netflix, what does that mean? Sometimes movies are made with funding by Netflix so that they premiere on Netflix as a special exciting thing, like TV series started doing a few years ago, and you have some really strong content there. Sometimes Netflix picks up the US rights to movies that are theatrical in other countries and it becomes a Netflix original. Sometimes it's something a different TV network makes overseas and Netflix picks it up. I'm not sure exactly the origins of this. I believe this is funded partially by Netflix or Netflix picks it up. It hasn't played elsewhere theatrically. And I often would feel lesser towards straight-to-video movies in the old days, and still these days, it has a little bit of a stigma to it, DTV stuff that's, well, if it wasn't good enough to be in the theater, blah, blah, blah. I've seen some Netflix originals that I thought were quite good. I thought Gerald's Game was really good, and some other things I've seen that are Bird Box I thought was good, very controversial among some people. But overall, all of the things that I see that are Netflix originals, I feel like there's a reason they didn't go to theaters. They might not be overtly bad, but they just don't work, or they wouldn't be commercial enough to put in a theater. And Velvet Buzzsaw, I would put in that category. It's certainly well made. The cast is really strong. You have, from Nightcrawler, you have Jake Gyllenhaal, you have Renee Russo, who's the wife of the man who wrote and directed this. You have Toni Collette, you have Daveed Diggs, who is in Blind Spotting, which I thought was one of the better movies last year, and John Malkovich, and some other familiar faces. Certainly well shot. And for me, it didn't really work. What this really is part is a satire of the art world, contemporary art world, which I personally didn't find very accessible. It's a world and a thing that I find sort of in a way frivolous. So to see all these people taking it so seriously, even though it was making fun of them, I was just like, yeah, whatever. And then you have a horror movie. So there's drama with the art world aspect of this, with some of the personal relationships and lives these people are leading, and there's spoofery of the pomposity and frivolousness and duplicity in the art world, and then you have paintings that kill people. Now, between those two things, I lean toward the paintings that kill people part where my interest is. So basically, a woman who's an art dealer or a junior art dealer, some man dies in her building, and she looks in his apartment and finds just tons and tons of paintings that he had done over the years. And she basically takes them all and they become this sensation. Problem is, they kill people. So that aspect of the movie, the horror element, I thought worked pretty well. But then the pendulum swings back toward Jake Gyllenhaal and his personal relationships, or somebody trying to get ahead in the art world, or a young artist. And I was just like, these are kind of two different movies, and I only sort of care about one of them. I think some people I don't know. I don't know if the average person is going to get much out of this. I think perhaps the horror elements and the star power is enough to hold your attention. But for me, if I want a spoof of the art world, Art School Confidential, which MVD put out a little while ago, also starring John Malkovich, I thought was really funny, really accessible, and had a lot of good, sharp points to be made. There's sharp points in this movie, too, and they tend to go in and out of people's bodies. So I didn't think Buzzsaw was all that great. It is now on Netflix. It just came out, and your mileage may vary, but I can totally see why this didn't go in theaters. I don't think the pacing was such that a theatrical audience would have held on to it, and I'm not sure it was good enough to go in the theater. So, up next, a much more accessible film to all. This is an animated version of the Dr. Seuss classic that we mostly know from a TV version from the mid-'60s. And this time we have Benedict Cumberbatch, TV's Sherlock and movies Doctor Strange, voicing the titular character of this big, angry green man who really doesn't want anything to do with Christmas, even though it surrounds him everywhere he goes. He can't help it. He's the Grinch.
M&M's, 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 give 'em as a holiday favor. M&M's, M&M's, M&M's.
So, was this really necessary? Of course not. The original Grinch is great. It's perfect. It's an hour. You're in, you're out. You've got Boris Karloff doing the voice. It's timeless. Why do another movie? Well, the answer can be said with two hands. But having said that, I did enjoy this quite a bit. This is very faithful to the look and feel of Dr. Seuss. It basically takes the Grinch story that we all know and just expands it a little bit. It expands the world of Whoville and the people who live there. And Cindy Lou Who now has lines and a little life, and her family life you see. The Grinch, more of his life you see. It feels much more, to me, not in a good way. It feels much more modern than the original. The original just seems like it was this other world, this other place. It's timeless. There's nothing to really date it at all. This feels much more like it's our world, just a version of our world none of us can get to. Like when you hear music on the radio that the Who's are listening to, they don't play the Who, funny enough. They are listening to songs you've heard of, and which is a little weird to me. And so it almost seems like it's in our reality. And a lot of their home lives look like they're based on an extrapolation of how we live, like toasters and microwaves and dishwashers and things like that. But all of the styling for it is very Dr. Seuss. It looks just like the old drawings and the old cartoons. And I saw this in the theater. I don't recall if I saw it in 3D or not, but that was an option. And it's one step closer to being able to step into that world, which is pretty cool. It still has good messages in it. The Grinch seems less of a villain in this than he did in the original. In this, he feels more like a cranky guy who's kind of misunderstood. Cumberbatch is fine as the voice, but he does that faux American accent that I find annoying with the nasal whatever. You can't really beat Boris Karloff. And that's another thing, too, is that Boris Karloff had this amazing, impressive, impactful voice. And you have, I believe, Pharrell Williams narrating this film, and he just sounds like a guy. It just sounds like they just said, hey buddy, you want to come over here and read these lines? It doesn't sound, again, perhaps for some people it's a lot more accessible and contemporary, but for me it had less gravitas, as much gravitas as a Grinch movie needs. So it's funny, it's fun, it's gorgeous to look at, the music is pretty good, and it does not do a disservice to the Grinch in any way. It's just giving you more of something. I was thinking during the trailer, I'm an Elvis fan, have been since I was a kid, and he only recorded so much and the man's dead, so you're not going to get anything new out of him. But there are people who sound a lot like him and who have recorded albums recording songs that he never did. Like I've got a couple CDs of covers of, if you ever wanted to hear Elvis do Sweet Home Alabama. This is that kind of thing. This is a way to give you more of something that was very finite originally. So I had no beef with the Grinch. I was not offended by the Grinch, and I went in expecting to be. So I think if you like the Grinch, it's fine for kids, obviously. There may be kids who sadly are more inclined to want to watch a modern animation than a 2D animation, but it's a little bit more on your plate for the Grinch. Up next is a film that is not for the kids. This is a new an adaptation of, I believe this was based on a book. We'll wind this back a little bit. There was a series of books by Stieg Larsson, Swedish author, the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Girl Who Played with Fire, all that kind of stuff. And he died, and you can't squeeze words out of a stiff. So somebody else started writing these books. I think one was based on his notes for another novel, and then there were more beyond that, I think. Anyway, this is the latest film based on the work of Stieg Larsson with Lisbeth Salander as its heroine. This is a tale of intrigue and darkness and family, funny enough, and it is entitled, let me make sure, this is entitled The Girl in the Spider's Web.
Meantime, see if you can guess what's in this box. What's in this box? What's in this box? Boys and girls, here's a chance for you and your family to help a crippled child get well again.
I saw the original Swedish trilogy, the girl with the girl movies, let's call them, with Noomi Rapace as, which I'm probably mispronouncing, not out of disrespect. She was fantastic in those movies, and she's great in everything. So when there was a U.S. remake with Rooney Mara, I believe, as the titular girl, done by what's his name, David Fincher, I wasn't too excited about the remake because I'd already seen it, and the remake is very good. If you've never seen the original, it's a fine substitute for it, but it's sort of like the same thing again. And this movie is interesting because you had your 3 Swedish films, then you had only the one remake of the first film in America, and this film is kind of a sequel to the remake as opposed to a sequel to the other Swedish movies, if that makes any sense. Different person playing, it's Claire Foy as Lisbeth Salander this time. The entire cast is different from the previous films, any of the previous films, which I guess wasn't a huge deal for me because I didn't expect that Noomi Rapace would be back again. But this one, I didn't find Salander that interesting in this film. I don't know, that maybe she wasn't given a lot to do. This feels much more, almost at times, like a Bond film in a sense. There's a lot of hopping from location to location and the Machiavellian machinations of the super smart overlord, criminal mastermind, evildoer, whatever. Honestly, I don't even remember what the story was. I know that they try to connect the big criminal with a strong element of our lead character's past, which I felt was a little cheesy in this, and especially how that ends. You see a little bit of it in the trailer. It feels like a superhero movie or something. It was kind of lame to me. I think if you're not terribly demanding, if you don't have any connection with the other films in the series, this is probably an okay thriller. It's not ingenious. It's kind of perverse here and there. I don't recall it being terribly gory or anything, but this was one of those movies when I saw it in the theater, I was kind of finished with it before the movie wrapped up. I was sort of like, okay, I'm done. Just wrap it up and let's move on to something else. So it's out there on video. It's probably an interesting contrast if you watch this versus one of the Swedish films, or if you watch this right after the Fincher movie. I don't think this did well enough to maybe justify more in this series. We'll see, but I have a feeling it probably wasn't It wasn't a great idea to make this, but they did anyway because, hey, money can be made. Up next, we have a film. Oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. This was a film that was made for HBO, now getting a video release for those of us who don't have HBO. This is a true story based on the account of a man, the guy who wrote and directed this actually, a man who gets a job to interview a former TV star, the diminutive co-star of such films as Seizure and Man with the Golden Gun, and co-star of the TV series Fantasy Island. This is what happens when a reporter spends an evening delving deep into the past and psyche of America's best-known little person in My Dinner with Herve. From the Beyond the Grave. Herve wasn't done with us yet. So this is one of those films that I watch and I'm like, how accurate is this? So I spent a little time over my lunch break right before we recorded this reading up on the truth behind this movie, and it actually is pretty accurate. Basically, the plot is you have a journalist who's trying to prove himself, former alcoholic trying to recover, and he is given this throwaway thing to go and interview that guy from Fantasy Island. It'll be this funny thing we stick in the back pages. It'll be a joke to, interview this has-been while you're in LA. This is a British journalist. While you're in LA to interview, important people. And basically what happens is Herve Villechaize, former star of Fantasy Island, as I said earlier, captivates this journalist and almost bullies him into doing a longer interview than was planned. And the way the film presents it is that it's over the course of 12 hours overnight in LA, these two guys talk and you get Herve Villechaize's life story in flashback, and it's this sort of battle of wills between these two guys. I guess in reality it happened a little bit different than that, but fairly close, and apparently the ending is exactly how it happened, where it happened. And this is set in 1993, and it happened, I think, within a week of when Villechaize killed himself. So this was this guy getting the last interview with Herve Villechaize, which he thought was going to be this surfacey, jokey piece that he had already written in his head before he showed up at the restaurant. And it turns into exploring the human being that was this icon for a brief period of time in a caricature. Peter Dinklage stars as Herve Villechaize. Dinklage is really good. Dinklage is a person of short stature who I forget that is the case sometimes because the guy is just good. He's more than just his height or lack thereof. And Jamie Dornan plays the lead in The Reporter. And we get his story too. Part of it is him trying to come to terms with the mess he's made of his life and how he's sort of coming to grips with where he is in life via talking to Nick Nack from The Man with the Golden Gun. I have a problem with movies where actors I know are playing people I know. Now, if you get a movie like Mary, Queen of Scots, yes, those women are those people as far as I'm concerned because I have nothing to compare it with. But when you have Will Smith playing Muhammad Ali, I'm looking at Will Smith, and I know I'm not looking at Muhammad Ali. I have a very big problem separating that. And this is sort of the case with this movie. I don't know that I ever lost Peter Dinklage in the role of Herve Villechaize. Height-wise, he looks like him, and they do some weird thing with jowls to make his face a little wider. But he sounds just like him. But other than that, I'm looking at Peter Dinklage. But I was able to just think about Herve Villechaize enough and get the story of his life, which again is actually pretty accurate from what I've read. And it's interesting. If you know this guy, I mean, if you grew up past the era of Herve Villechaize, I don't know if this movie is going to mean squat to you. I mean, maybe it'll mean something as a character study of, two human beings, getting to know each other. But if you knew the guy, it's very interesting to find out what went on behind the scenes on Fantasy Island with Andy Garcia as Ricardo Montalban. Very respectful portrayal, but it's still a little weird. Again, somebody I know playing somebody I know it almost seems like a joke. And there were times where the movie felt jokey, where it's like, haha, this little guy's doing these crazy things, because apparently he was a womanizer and he was an artist and he carried a knife and would pull it when he felt provoked because that was how he protected himself. So it's interesting. I wasn't sure how I was going to like this going in. I think overall I did like it. I think it was very respectful toward its subject, which is nice because it could have not been. At times it felt a little exploitive, but the more I've read, the more the person who made this wanted to tell the story out of respect for Herve Villechaize, which I think is pretty cool. So this is out, I believe, tomorrow on video on demand and Blu-ray and DVD and all that stuff. And I think if you're curious about it, it's probably worth checking out. And if you like Dinklage, it's certainly very different from anything he's done before. It's very different from Game of Thrones. Speaking of different and speaking of Europe, woo! Hi, how are you? Good to see you again. We have a German film that I was able to see theatrically. It didn't play much of anywhere, but it was deserving of being seen. So here we are on video, where it's going to be a lot easier to see than it was with me driving 4 hours to see it. We have the story of basically a 911 operator who gets a call of somebody who's in trouble. And this film takes place over the course of an evening where he's trying to help this person survive very, very scary circumstances. And it is called The Guilty.
This sounds like a gun battle over there.
Hey, is it real? Looks like real. Hey, it sounds like real.
I always argue that everything is better in a theater. Some people look at that and I'll catch it on video. Or that won't lose anything on video. Well, everything you loses something on video. I think at home there's more distractions. You can pause something. You can look at your phone. You can do it in the theater too, but that makes you a terrible person. You can do all sorts of things, but in the theater, it's out of your control. You're in the dark. You're just focused on one thing. So this movie was riveting in the theater, as the critical quotes probably said. It starts off, the guy takes a couple calls, and then we get right into this, and it all takes place. You're focused on this police dispatch person, and you're with them for that 90 minutes. All he knows is what he's hearing on the other end of the line. You hear him talk to a lot of other people, but you don't see them. There may be one or other two other characters in the office where he's working, but it's really that. This could almost really be a play or a radio drama, but it's good. It's really tight. It's really tense. You are just with this guy, and you feel the frustration he feels when he can't get out to help this person, and he's only getting bits and pieces of information as to where they might be, and you see him using all the different technology at his disposal as far as running plate numbers and tracking tracking people and GPS and all that. I really liked it a lot. Some people may not want to watch it because it's subtitled. Well, you're going to miss a good movie if that's the case. It's reminiscent of a movie called The Call that was done a few years back with Halle Berry, where she's a 911 operator and somebody's locked in the trunk of a car, and that's sort of the same thing, only in that one you see both sides of the conversation, and eventually Halle Berry, to me when it got ridiculous, she's just like, I want to hunt a serial killer, so she goes out and tries to take down a serial killer. This doesn't do that. This stays very, very realistic. It is very focused on this one guy, and I thought it was really good. It did not play much theatrically, I think because it was German and such a limited scope of a film, but it's certainly worth checking out. And again, not to go against what I just said, but watching it at home, it's not a very cinematic film in terms of how it's shot. So if you're watching it on a smaller screen, you're still getting the impact. You're just not getting that, isolated impact that you get in the theater. Now on to my favorite part of the show. Now that we have 27 minutes to talk about 2 movies, maybe I'll talk about some other movies too. We are on to the Arrow Video Corner. We have 2 films. Funny enough, they're both directed by the same person, or co-directed by the same person. First up is a Giallo film from 1971, so it's pretty early in the Giallo sweepstakes, not too far after Bird with the Crystal Plumage, which kind of kicked it off, even though Blood and Black Lace really kind of did. We have Franco Nero, one of the greats of 60s, 70s Italian cinema, as an alcoholic reporter who's on the trail of a killer and eventually might be considered by many to be the killer in a film entitled The Fifth Chord.
Okay, cowboys, stick 'em up. Got you covered.
I don't know if there's anything left to be said after that trailer. I think it pretty much sums up the film succinctly, and it's stylish, though. That's what I love about Italian movies of the 70s, Italian genre movies of the 70s and giallos, and the trailers that are brilliant and gorgeous and have great music and don't tell you a damn thing about what the movie's about. That didn't do a whole lot for me to remember what this was. I saw this a few weeks ago. I really like this a lot. This is a movie that's been on video for a while. Blue Underground had this out before this new Arrow edition. And oh man. Okay, so Luigi, I have to look. Where is he? Luigi Bozzoni, a name I didn't know until Arrow has put out a couple of his films. Working with Vittorio Storaro, who's one of the all-time great cinematographers, and Ennio Morricone on music. So the damn thing's going to look and sound pretty good, and it does. There are shots in this movie that I just had to pause and just go this is gorgeous, beautiful composition. The way architecture is used. There's a scene where 2 men are walking down a staircase, and the staircase basically just creates these horizontal lines, stripes as they're walking down. It's gorgeous. You could watch this movie with the sound off and still have a good time with just the visuals. Story basically, it's a giallo. So as I've said often, that means somebody is committing murders, usually somebody with black gloves and who you can't see, and somebody is trying to figure out somebody with some kind of personal connection is trying to figure out who's doing these crimes before either they are arrested for them or they are themselves killed. So you have a strange murder goes on, and Franco Nero shows up as this sort of down on his luck alcoholic journalist who's as many films do, journalist, but he acts like a cop, who's working with the police to try to find who's doing this. And eventually, there's enough fuzziness that it starts to be a consideration that maybe he's the one who's doing it. And we as the audience don't know. So it's very, very stylish. It's very good. It's very creepy at times. There's a sequence toward the end of the film where a little boy is home alone and you realize that the killer's inside the house with the kid. And it's incredibly tense and creepy and really, really expertly done. And I thought that was, for me, the standout moment in the movie. But it also is just, again, I'm going to repeat myself over and over, but the music is so good and it looks so good. And Franco Nero is so damn cool. It made it a really, really good time. And it's one of those movies that I watched, I'm like, how has this never come across my doorstep before? Extras are voluminous. You have a really good commentary on this film. As with all the Arrow commentaries, it tells you everything you need to know about this movie, what led up to this movie, how it was received, but also Italian history and the history of the people who were working on it and the genre itself. It was very informative and it was fun to listen to it that way. You have a new interview with Franco Nero, which is sort of career spanning, and he talks specifically about working with this director in this movie as well. I didn't know he was married to Vanessa Redgrave, which I thought was cool. And then you have other extras about the film and the music and the director. So it's a nice package. It looks gorgeous. This is one of those movies that if I was not able to keep my review copy, I would go and buy because I liked it that much. So up next is another film by Luigi Bozzoni. my new favorite director for this week, and it is again sort of a proto-giallo. It takes place. This is, I think, mid-60s, black and white, very nicely shot again. And a man goes to a seaside village. He breaks up with a woman in the opening frames of the film, and he goes to a seaside village to sort of see if he can find this woman who worked at a hotel who he had sort of a crush on or a dalliance with, and he finds out she's missing or murdered. So he starts to investigate. Sounds just like the last movie we talked about. And much intrigue and strangeness abounds in a film entitled The Possessed.
A haunted house and scare him away forever.
Granny! Ah, haunted house. Here you are, Lancelot. Hey, Spook, come back with that post-sugar crisp cereal.
Beautifully shot. I say that a lot. I'm a sucker for good visuals. Sometimes good visuals can make up for deficiencies in other departments. This was really cool. Again, a movie I'd never heard of. It's called The Possessed. Alternate title was The Lady of the Lake. And just I also like movies that kind of have this weird sort of dreamlike feel to them, and this has that. Black and white cinematography is like amazing. There's some really neat dreamlike shots. Some of them may have been dream sequences too, for that matter. It's sort of nonlinear in a way. There are flashbacks, and there are other things that take you not annoyingly confusing, but take a minute to sort of realize what you're looking at and when it's happening. Eventually, it works its way to sort of gruesome and creepy aren't really the right words, but it's sort of an uncomfortable, when at the end of the film, when the mystery is solved, as Clouseau would say, and it is laid out, literally, what they were talking about and how things went down, you're like, ooh, that makes me a little uncomfortable, which is cool. So this was 1965. Peter Baldwin was an American actor, and he actually went on to he did some small roles for a while, then he went on to TV directing. I found out he directed a bunch of Partridge Family episodes. So if you want to see a guy who directed a Partridge Family episode looking for somebody who strangled a woman, then this is the film for you. Interesting cast. Not any faces that I really recognize, but I think there are people who did work a lot in that era. And it just had a really cool feel to it. It had an interesting score again, and it's giallo, but it's more casual. It doesn't have that sort of driving force that a lot of the 70s giallos have. This is a much more quiet, I don't want to say Bergman-esque, but it's a much more quiet, leisurely film, even though it clocks in, I think, at maybe 80 minutes. It's not very long at all. It looks beautiful. This transfer is great. You have a commentary by Tim Lucas, which is always a good thing, from Video Watchdog and Mario Bava's biographer. So if there's any Bava-related details, he'll point those out. But otherwise, it's just a really intelligent look at everybody who was in the film and the themes of the film. And it helped me understand a few things that maybe I didn't catch when I watched it without the commentary. Also, again, more extras based on the actors in the film and the production crew. Apparently, it was co-directed, actually, by Bozzoni and Franco Rossellini, who is a relation to Roberto Rossellini, who was pretty well known for some films, too, in his own right. So this is a really cool flick. I'm so thrilled that Arrow puts out stuff like this. This is the kind of... At this point, I've seen so many movies that when somebody can show me a movie I've never heard of and it's this good, it's really exciting. And for me, Arrow is pretty darn consistent with that. I mean, once in a while, they'll put out a Waterworld, but or Evil Ed or something that I don't think is that great. But they put out enough stuff that I think is amazing that, to me, they're like the top in my game. They're my Criterion. They put out the kind of movies I like with the treatment that Criterion does. So that is out on Blu-ray this week, tomorrow. Both of those films are. Next week we'll have a few more from a few different companies, actually, that are not just Arrow. I have a little bit of time, so I'm going to talk about some other stuff just to help you get your non-paying dollars worth for this program. Wearing a Jackie Chan Police Story 3 t-shirt that I got back in the 90s at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, back when Hong Kong movies were first hitting big, and Boston was a really hot spot for theatrical screenings of Hong Kong stuff before people could really get them easily here, people who didn't live in a city with a Chinatown or anything. And I'm going almost as soon as I stop talking here, to the Alamo Drafthouse Yonkers, one of my favorite places, because they're running a double feature of Jackie Chan's Police Story and Police Story 2, which were the first movies that he made and directed that really broke him out of the mold of being in period pieces, like, feudal China, martial arts movies. He took sort of what he had learned by working with Hal Needham on Cannonball Run and what he had learned from making his own movies and started doing contemporary films. And Police Story was the first one where he plays a hotshot cop trying to take down a obviously a villainous crime lord. And then Police Story 2 was obviously the sequel to that. These were like 1985, 1986 or 7, if I recall. And I'm saying all that because Janus Films and the Criterion Collection are putting these movies out for the first time on Blu-ray in this country. They had been out before when Chan hit big with Miramax or New Line releasing Rumble in the Bronx. There was that brief period, probably from when most people listening to me know him. He had this big popularity in the mid to late 90s where he was in some new movies. He was in Rush Hour and he was in Shanghai Nights and Tuxedo and stuff. And they started re-releasing his earlier films into theaters and on video. So the Police Story films came out that way in this country on video, but they were messed with. Weinstein Company and New Line were the two companies that had these, or I should say Miramax, which became Weinstein. And they would re-edit the films, they would redub them into English, they would take the music out and they would put new music in, and they tried to make them what they thought was more commercial, or they thought they were making Jackie Chan movies better than he knew how to make them, which was always annoying for those of us who gave a care. Anyway, Criterion is putting these out now on Blu-ray relatively soon, and they're going to be the original uncut versions. They're going to look and sound great, and they're going to have extras. Other countries have had this before us. Eureka Entertainment is doing this currently with a lot of Chan films in England, but you need to have an all-region player to play those here, so I don't have any of those yet. And in Hong Kong, some have come out over the years, unmolested versions of those. So because this Blu-ray set is coming out, a lot of times now you'll see new theatrical screenings of movies before they hit video, because in order to do the remastering, you can do a nice DCP, which is what theaters use now. So going on tour in this country, just told you all that to tell you this, is Police Story and Police Story 2. They're generally playing as a double feature. I know it's coming to the Coolidge Corner Theater in Boston. Proctor's Theater in Schenectady, New York has them coming up, I think in March. Check your local listings. Alamo has it now. It's not an Alamo exclusive thing. So if you have a local theater, an indie theater, a strip mall theater, or whatever, that is open to suggestion, tell them to play these movies because they're really good. These are the movies that, for me, set the standard as to what an action movie could be and should be. And these are the movies that are responsible for me being pretty down on most action movies I see now. The Chan movies, it's real. It's him doing this stuff. It's him and stuntmen doing this stuff. When a car goes through a building, it's not a cartoon car going through a cartoon building on wires. It's cars running over buildings. When somebody gets hit by a car in one of these movies, they were injured. They're not CGI people. So I'm very excited about that. And the fact that you, the viewing public, if you're interested, can see these movies that are so damn good and have been so damn hard to see for so long. Hopefully it bodes well. Hopefully these discs will sell a lot and that they will license more of these, because historically Hong Kong films since the 90s have been really hard to get reissues of. They're really hard to get rights to show in theaters. In the film realm, they're hard to get prints to show in theaters. And if a US distributor is going to start picking these up and making them available, boy, there's going to be a lot of smiling faces in theaters for the people who take the chance, because this stuff is amazing. This stuff makes me giggle like a little schoolgirl, jump up and down like an anime schoolgirl, because you can't believe what you're seeing. And they're funny and they're exciting. And there's a sense of excitement to the action because there's a sense of jeopardy in the action. When you watch a Fast and the Furious movie, it's fake. It's all fake. You know it's fake. You know it's cartoon cars. It's just like, oh, wow, somebody with a keyboard made that car do a corkscrew in the air. Well, in these movies, the car's really doing a corkscrew, and somebody had to figure out how to do that. So that's really cool, and hopefully anybody who can get to theaters in Boston or theaters in Schenectady really should make a point to do this, because they're really, really good. I would love it if they came here, but sometimes you got to go where the action is, you know? And the action is in the frame of these films. Speaking of what I did on my summer vacation, what I did on my weekend, I was at Alamo on Saturday. I pulled what was my first over 24 hours stretch of being awake since probably college. Alamo does these actor marathons annually. First one I went to was Arnold Schwarzenegger Marathon, where they show 6 movies. They don't tell you what they're going to be ahead of time, on film on the big screen with trailers for the actors' work in between, and usually get a little toy or a little trinket. And then the next year it was Kurt Russell, and then this year it was Pam Grier. They called it Wham Pam, the Pam Grier Marathon. And I'm a huge Pam Grier fan, and it was very exciting to see, what these movies were going to be. When you think about her career, she really was only the star mostly of films in the 70s, and Jackie Brown. Any other time she was in a small role, so the question was, are we going to get some of her later work, but she's only in a full-length film for 10 minutes, or are we going to get all the classic stuff? Are we going to get the biggest titles, or are we not? And what it turned out to be was Jackie Brown, Scream Blackula Scream, Friday Foster, which was way more fun than I remembered it being. What else was it? Original Gangsters, which was the sort of the Expendables of blaxploitation movies that Fred Williamson and Larry Cohen put together long ago, and maybe one other. That may have been it. I don't remember. At any rate, it was really good. It was really cool. She's a woman who's, I didn't know a lot about her growing up. I think I wasn't the demographic, and there were old movies at that point. By the time I was coming of age and watching a lot of movies, her stuff was harder to see. It never got played on TV. It wasn't too easy to find on video until Orion put out a series of tapes. And then in the 90s, they all hit DVD, and they've been very accessible since then. It really wasn't until Tarantino put her in Jackie Brown, which is a really, really good movie. And to me, the best thing she ever did, because it actually lets her act and be, show a range that isn't just her trying to get revenge on people. It wasn't until he put her in Jackie Brown that she became cool again, and then the hipsters and everybody else sort of caught on to her, and that's when her stuff became available again. But she was really in her prime from like 71 to 77 or so, when she was in the AIP action revenge movies, and then she was before that she was in the Women in Prison movies. Black Mama, White Mama was the other one, sort of a women in prison Filipino take on the Defiant Ones, which is pretty fun. Then she did the action movies, and then she sort of branched out a little bit. Friday Foster was a little bit more urbane. It was sort of based on a comic strip, and she was a photojournalist who got involved with intrigue, and Yaphet Kotto as a smooth-talking, cool-walking private eye who was great. And then she just kind of fell into the role of bit player. She was in Fort Apache the Bronx as in a bit part, and she was in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey in a bit part, and she was in all these little things as a small role, but she never really regained that lead role thing again. She was originally supposed to be at this event that happened on Saturday, but she got work, and that's a good thing. So apparently she's going to be on a new CBS TV series, which isn't bad. They said she is going to come back. So for those of you who are Pam Grier fans who can get to the Alamo in Yonkers, sometime next year she will be there for some sort of event. I'm wondering if maybe they'll show some of the movies they didn't show yesterday, because everybody would expect it was going to be Coffee and Foxy Brown and some of that stuff, and it wasn't. So maybe we'll see those on the big screen there. It was all film that we saw. All the prints looked amazing. They all looked like they were new movies, which is cool when you're watching something from 1971 that was shot for about $1.80. The trinket, the tchotchke that everybody got was a really cool coffee mug that had the logo of the festival on it. And they ran all Pam Grier trailers between the films. So I had a wonderful time. It was really great. It was really fun to see her large and in charge on the big screen, and to really be reminded of how good a movie Jackie Brown is, both for her and for Tarantino. It's not as poppy and silly, and it's much more serious. It's a really serious, decent crime movie, and she's really great in it. So I would recommend any of the films I mentioned, and really pretty much any 70s Pam Grier movie, maybe other than Twilight People, is worth checking out. So I'm going to call it a day there so I can hit the road again. And I will thank you for watching and look forward to talking to you again next week with whatever happens to come out in theaters. It looks like Lego Movie 2, Cold Pursuit, in which Liam Neeson plays a man named Coxman, which is pretty exciting for me, and Bohemian Rhapsody and some other nutty stuff on video. Until then, I am Mark, and I am the Cinemaniac.